We are going to follow the money.
Everything you need to know can be understood with this simple phrase: follow the money. And believe me, that's what's happened.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Welcome to College Sports Follow the Money, an all-new podcast diving into the critical issues surrounding the big business of college sports. I'm Andrew Monaco, joined by former president of Texas A&M University and former chancellor at the University of Missouri, Dr. Bowen Loftin, and former vice president and general manager of Fox Sports Southwest, Jon Heidtke. From NIL to the transfer portal and opt-outs, to the college football playoff, conference realignment, and more, we tackle the key issues facing college athletics today and into the future.
I need to feel you, Jerry! Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money! Show me the money! You loudest black man!
We welcome you to another episode of College Sports Follow the Money. It is episode 82, along with Dr. Bowen Loftin and Jon Heidtke. I'm Andrew Monaco, and we're going to talk about how you can score. Whether it's by getting fired, does that even make sense? We're going to make it make sense. How you can score in an NIL deal, and an update on the SCORE Act that is trying to go through Congress. Howdy, fellas. How are you? It's been a while since we've talked, and it's good to be back. As I said, this is the hockey line. Dr. Loftin's in the middle. I'm playing the off wing. I'm a right-handed shot on the left side. John's our enforcer.
Well, John's going to send me down the ice and get my head right into the net. I can see it all right now, guys. I'll just be sliding right down there. I had the best time when I was president dealing with our hockey team. They're a club team, but they're a great bunch of guys. And when you get over the smell of the unwashed jerseys, you can have a lot of fun there, guy.
Yeah. John, you just got to protect Dr. Loftin. He's got to have room to skate.
Anybody who touches him is going to get the full enforce. This goon comes after him.
I love it. Even though it's a brand new hockey season, let's talk about some topics that we've talked about before. Oh, by the way, there's another college coach that's been fired and let go. James Franklin let go at Penn State. So, yeah,
on Sunday.
It was absolutely something. We'll get to the lack of patience, if we will, but Dr. Loftin, if you can get us started about buyouts, and in James Franklin's case, it's about $50 million, and yet he has an offset in his buyout.
Yeah, he does. I mean, all these are a little bit unique, but his is actually fairly standard. I mean, I've signed, like I say, 85 coaching contracts in my day, and I never signed Jimbo's, thankfully, but my point is that normally there is an offset. Normally, you're going to say it in the contract, if we want you to look for a job, prove you're doing it, and if you get one, we're going to offset what we pay you based on what you're getting paid in your new gig. That's very standard. That was totally missing from Jimbo Fisher's contract. First one I've ever seen of that magnitude without that kind of clause in it. And I think it's reflects the fact that a certain person wrote his contract, and it wasn't anybody who worked for Texas A&M. But anyway, that's life there. But we lost three more this weekend. Franklin being the obvious one everybody's talking about, but don't forget Birmingham's minus a coach right now.
Trent Dilfer, yep.
Exactly, and we also have a guy from what school is he from?
Oregon State.
Oregon
Trent
State,
Bray.
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So one Sunday was another day for this to happen. Franklin gets all the attention because it's a lot of money. I mean, he was given when he was sort of threatening to go west. There was a lot of angst in State College, and they got busy and gave him, back in 2021, a large 10-year, 11-year contract that was totally guaranteed, and left on that contract is still $45 million to pay out, which makes it the second biggest buyout so far. Oddly, until Jimbo, $20 million was the most ever paid out. And then we had Gus and we had Jimbo, and those Gus's wasn't in Jimbo's category exactly, but it was bigger than $20 million. And those have stood for a while. Now we got a $45 million buyout as well. I don't know if it's going to get any better, guys. I just don't know that. What's interesting is that when you buy a coach out, that isn't the only cost. you have to deal with hiring a new coach. And that coach likely has a job with a buyout of their own. I've been looking, obviously, the people are talking right now about a coach in Indiana and a coach in Nebraska are the ones that are most commonly discussed right now as Penn State material. And both of them have buyout, I think $5 million in the case of Rule anyway. So it's not just the cost of the buyout for your coach who's leaving, it's the buyout of the coach you're bringing's contract. And then you've got to, of course, pay that coach. And guess what? They're going to want to bring in a whole new team of people, and all that adds up. And so you're talking about a cost, in case of Penn State's case, probably $55, $60 million to make this whole thing work in terms of the buyout of Franklin, but also the buy-in of a new coach with whoever they want to bring with them, and potentially buyouts of the coordinators and assistant coaches you have in play right now, which may or may not have a buyout provision. And those are quite variable. Those contracts may be 1 to 3 years long, so you don't know where you are in that particular stage until you know who it is you're talking about. So I'm saying it'll be about $60 million, I think, for Penn State to walk away with a new coach right now, at minimum, maybe more than that. And it's just what's going on right now. It's incredible to me. It's costing this much, but I've lived through this process as a president and now ex-president who's seen these things continue to escalate. In the old days, it was so different. There was a slow inflation of contracts. But I've told you, when I was here as a student, Coach Gene Stallings was here as both the AD and the head coach, and he made under $100,000 a year at that. And I don't recall any buyout being in there in that particular contract. He was happy to do it. And that's all gone now, folks.
Do you think the buyouts will get higher because there's less rope? There's less patience.
I think if you look at Elko's contract, you'll see a bit of a glimmer there. There's a lot in his contract about incentivization and not as much about the opposite. So I think there's enough buyer shock and experiences here with these extraordinarily rapid buyouts. And we've had how many already this season? In D1 alone, we've had over a dozen and more to come. I mean, I'm sure we're not done yet. And it's getting earlier every year. And that just shows you how impatient the people are who are making or driving these decisions. Sometimes it's the leadership of the school, but largely it's somebody else. It's somebody who's just writing big checks to the school who's pretty impatient. They've given lots of money to the school, potentially to donations, but also NIL stuff. And they feel like they have a say. And I can't deny that. If you're writing a check, you have some say usually in how that money is spent. And so I think that's what we're seeing right now. But I do believe there is a glimmer of hope looking at Elko's contract and ones like it who are pretty recent, post-Jimbo contracts. You're seeing people putting in more language about incentivizing the coach to be successful and less about how they can do anything they want to do and still get a huge amount of money at the end of the day. I saw a neat number the other day. They talked about Paterno. He coached, 40 plus years, okay? His total, over his lifetime as a coach, his total pay was less than the $45 million that Franklin's going to get right now. So think about it, a famous, long-lived coach like that, who was well treated by the standards of his day, made less money in his lifetime as a coach than this one payout to get rid of a coach is costing. That to me is what's most incredible about this.
And John, James Franklin, will use him. He has a year, I believe, to get, he has to prove that he is looking for a job. It doesn't have to be back on the sidelines. James Franklin could be in a TV studio or he could be doing games, but he can't just sit back and collect the money. I think Brett Bielema also went through this a couple of years ago, but there's got to be a good faith effort, does there not, for him, I believe, in the next year to keep this buyout?
I think so. And I think again, the language there, people are getting smarter with these deals. And again, to Dr. Loftus' point, these should always be in these types of agreements. But again, as long as he looks for something to mitigate it, that buyout does get that lower. And again, if he doesn't coach, he's got 50 million coming to him. But most of these guys, once they get coaching in their blood, after they sit out a year, they want to get back into it. And again, Franklin's going to be a relatively hot commodity for these other schools that are losing coaches. So probably Penn State sitting there looking at, and from a financial perspective, say, are we really going to pay this 50 million? And so they're looking at other ways. And the other interesting news, and I don't know if this was coincidental, but I put it out there to you, that last week there was a lot of noise about the Big Ten accepting a equity deal, and sounds like it's pretty far down the road. And I believe it's the California pension system. So the pension system is looking to make that investment in it. And if that deal gets across the finish line here soon, that was going to be that was going to be 140 million immediately available to teams. And that money, if I'm Penn State, I'm looking at that too and says, okay, if we have to eat 50 million, this might be the time to do it. So that's happening out there too. So I think if you see big schools, particularly the Big Ten, if there's another person out there on the hot seat, I'm not sure exactly who that may be at this point in time, but certainly I think again there's some wins out there that would probably help them ease this financial situation if there is a truth to these deals.
Well, John, if you just think the two front runners, as Dr. Loftin said, are two Big Ten coaches.
Yeah.
So it could affect two Big Ten schools with that. Interesting, you bring that up. The initial thought was it was a private equity company. It's not. But now we're finding out, did that have any, because it's connected to the California pensions, did that have any influence on UCLA and USC? Like, was that part of it, or was it something that just came even after they jumped and left the Pac-12?
Everybody's been kind of talking about that. I think again, this equity thing has probably picked up more steam in the last probably year, maybe 18 months. So I don't know if that UCLA planned on that. But what I've read is they're going to create an entity called Big Ten Enterprises, which are putting all conference assets into that, which will ultimately mean the television rights once that deal ends with Fox. So then I think, again, what these pension funds are looking at, and if they look at the way the current trends are going, and again, if obviously, but people think the Big Ten will be one of the major players in this process. And depending what that looks like now, if this pension fund can get part of those television rights, again, history tells us that these rights continue to grow, and we've barely scratched the surface right now of the streaming companies' interest in that. And again, if you look at their capitalization, they're 15, 20 times higher, more capitalization. They're in the B's than our guys are in the T's, than these guys are the legacy ones that are in the M's and B's. So I think again they're making a solid investment in that, and I think again part of what the Big Ten's trying to do is to try to keep the everybody together here. They've actually talked about, again, that money could be distributed differently based on performance versus equal revenue sharing. So I think that's one thing that Michigan and Ohio State were somewhat skeptical of when this first came out. But now I think maybe some of their concerns have been assuaged with the fact that there's going to be, it looked like, uneven revenue sharing, similar to what the ACC's done, because Ohio State's finally said, why am I getting the same thing that Purdue's getting paid is, when we're really putting a lot more effort into it than they are. So these conversations are going to continue to happen, even if you're on, in the best conference in the land. There's still inequities there. And again, I think the grant of rights would be the thing that would scare me the most from that, because that would take it all the way to 2047. So that would be interesting to see what that's going to do to the TV landscape going forward. But I think again they're trying to trade off that $2.4 billion investment versus what the TV rights are going to look like, in the next 10, 12 years.
Before we leave this idea, John, you talk grants of rights, the length. Is that something we can look forward to being consistent over time? Is how many years these grants are good for? I mean, I've seen some talk about shortening that time frame quite a bit. Do you think it's going to be a stable type of time frame every time we go through a renegotiation of these grants or rights?
Well, I think, again, this one's significant in the sense that you're talking about, $2.4 billion. So if that's what's going to get a school $140 million up front now and more down the road, you're right now.
That would drive it then. Okay.
That's probably driving a lot of the conversation right now. Again, what's the name of our podcast? Follow the money. And here's an entity. And what's interesting about this, it's a pension system. So they believe that there's money to be had out there. I mean, I can see P&E guys all over this in their world, but this one's even more interesting because apparently, I think, again, there were a lot of potential people at the table talking about this. And at the end of the day, the Big Ten decided to go with with the group that's representing a pension fund, which are usually some of the most conservative investments out there.
Yeah.
The Big 12 went through an argument a little while back about having a private equity deal that would look at a labeling, a naming thing. That kind of faded away, though. This is a more serious effort right here in terms of I'm going to give you money, but I want a percentage of the take going forward. That's what I think the pension plan is basically looking for here.
And I believe,
I understand that.
Right, they're going to get a 10%, return on their investment in Big Ten enterprises. So now the question, begs itself, what's all in Big Ten enterprises? But if they brand the conference like the Big Ten was trying to do and say it was the all-state conference, there'll be significant revenue in that. Then again, if the conference gets that revenue, then, my guess is that you're getting close to where, the private equity guy is going to get a bigger share than any of the individual schools together when it's all said and done. But the trade-off is to deal with issues right now, and $140 million can go a long way, with the upfront payment from that.
Dr. Loftin, Pat Kraft, the AD, was adamant of saying that this does not come from the academic side or the university. This is athletics. That's still a little bit of a misnomer, is it not, for some fans on the outside? Well, Penn State University, what are they paying James Franklin? Pat Kraft said, no, this is coming from this is coming out of athletics.
Well, just back off a little, guys. I mean, this is still Big Ten, though. Okay, if you look outside the Power Four, what you find is that most often either the students are paying part of the price for athletics, or academic money is being transferred, or both. So again, you're unique in a sense, being in the most elite conferences in the country with the biggest money in the country, because they can honestly say most of the time that there's no money going to. But I'll point out a couple of things. LSU and Texas have both had deals where they very publicly said X million dollars of our athletic revenue is going into the academic enterprise of the institution. That's not a common thing, but a couple of schools have said that. Vanderbilt, on the other hand, which is private and doesn't say much about what they do, when I've talked to their leadership over time, they have consistently pointed out that they move a lot of money every year from their hospital system, which is the biggest part of Vanderbilt, quite frankly, into athletics, because they're playing with the big boys, and the amount of money coming into Vanderbilt from the conference is the same as Texas A&M or Texas. However, those two schools I mentioned have many more sources of revenue of size than Vanderbilt does. Mm-hmm. Vanderbilt's got a small stadium. They don't have a huge footprint, visibility even in their own city of Nashville, and sponsorships are very rare there of any consequence. So because of that, the money from the conference is inadequate to fund the enterprise that Vanderbilt has built athletically. So they have to tap into other sources. And so I know based on conversations with their leadership that they have historically moved lots of money from their hospital system into athletics there. And that's an almost unique situation at this level, but that happens. It's probably the only SEC school that does that. But my point to you simply is that the mall must be fed. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there are scraps thrown out to the academic side of the equation, as I've seen at LSU and at Texas. But in general, the schools are happy if athletics is going to be able to fund itself. Otherwise, they have to tax the kids. Mm-hmm. When I was a student at Texas A&M a long, long time ago, guess what? I helped pay for the second deck on the east side of Kyle Field. I was taxed to pay that. And that's been common and is still common, especially in the lower in the lower half of the D1 and also in D2 and D3.
John, I have to chuckle because late 90s, there was an SEC coach who knew he was going to be fired. So He walked into the AD's office on a Monday and negotiated, at the time, this didn't happen, his radio and TV money and apparel money. And for that, he didn't coach for, I believe it was 5 years was in the contract. That's why he ended up being in the studio on ABC, even when his name was going around. Oh, how things have changed in the buyout world. And it wasn't that long ago.
So what's your buyout, Andrew? I gotta ask you a question.
It is if Franklin is 50 million, that's 50 and 6 zeros. I have 6 zeros after the decimal.
No 5 though, right?
No, everything is zero. It's a 7-figure zero buyout is my buyout.
And you even have to give back your Adidas apparel, right? Branded apparel, isn't that right?
Oh, that's exactly right. And then I don't get a discount any longer, so I'd have to pay full. So you do that, yeah. That's my buyout, gang.
Yeah, love it.
Go Nike. Go Nike now.
Put myself up for bid, right?
Exactly.
From the buyouts to Dr. Loftin, NIL deals. There's been some talk about, well, we talked about agents in the past, that agents who have college players are getting between 15 to 20% of these deals. Now, NIL deals, agents were doing those for free. Now there's a percentage, and there's some talk now that that could get streamlined, for lack of a better phrase, but this is the ancillary things that go into NIL. We look at sometimes just the dollars, but the agents and everything else, we're learning more and more about all that is going into these name, image, and likeness deals.
Yeah, it's amazing. But just so you have a little quote to walk on here. This is interesting. This is something. There's a kind of a newsletter coming out called Until Saturday. A guy named Jason Kirk writes it. I enjoy his writing quite a bit. I'm going to just read you a couple of sentences from his last article, okay? In the logic of college football contracts, a logic that has long been carefully cultivated by the agents charged with extracting money from schools. That's how he leads out his article about Franklin right now. That is so astute. I mean, that's the challenge. Of course, as you said, the agent piece is highly interesting how it comes out. The pros have long controlled that. So the professional leagues typically have caps on how much the agents can walk away with.
Right.
That is slowly, I think, going to filter into the college world that we live in, guys. It has to almost. But these 10 and 20% deals are fairly lucrative when you're talking about, tens of millions of dollars per year of pay, and buyouts that can, again, reach into the $50 to $77 million level. So I think that's very interesting to see that out there. But you sent us a very interesting article yourself, Andrew. You might want to walk through a bit of that and talk about some of the actual numbers that are in play when it comes to the agents themselves and how much they can or cannot walk away with.
Yeah, so Darren Heitner, who does NIL at Miami Law, and someone Christy follows, and we had Christy on our last episode. So the NIL agent landscape is beginning to standardize its commission structures. Excuse me. This is what Darren posted on X. Agents typically charge 15 to 20% for individually negotiated marketing deals, 5% for collective and revenue sharing agreements. Closely resembles pro sports representation. Now, that's just for the collective and revenue sharing. At the pro level, NFL agents face a 3% cap on team contracts, while NBA agents are limited to 4%. In contrast, MLB agents average 5% without such restrictions. The 5% rate for NIL collective revenue sharing deals would likely align with broader pro sports norms, if not for the fee caps imposed by the NFLPA and NBAPA. Initially, some veteran agents opted not to change commissions on collective deals. However, they've since reconsidered this approach, recognizing that the extensive time and resources required to effectively represent college athletes make a commission-free model unsustainable. And I get the time. I can tell you, John, you know this. My rate when I was with an agent was 10%. when it came to deals that they would find for me when I was freelancing. One contract I had, I think it was 5% for marketing. The 20% stunned me when I found that out. And I could see why an agent would. You don't have to be regulated. You have to be regulated in the pro sports. If you're not a regulated agent, you cannot negotiate a contract for a player. So to your point, Dr. Loftin, by volume, if I can get 15 to 20%, now an additional fee. Yeah, it's interesting. But again, it's Wild West, and maybe there are some guide rails. I don't know, but it was Darren's a very interesting follow on X for sure.
Well, again, given who we are as colleges, it's very difficult to imagine an imposition of a cap on agent fees unless we had some type of effective collective to work with. Conferences could probably do it, but even there, I could see antitrust things coming into play. So I do believe the issue here could be ultimately in the courts if it gets to really be a sticking point, because it's not clear whether we have the power or the will as universities to group together in a way that lets us regulate these kinds of fee structures, whereas the owners do that routinely within the context of professional teams.
And you would have the big agents who had maybe a big name Major League Baseball pitcher or player. He would represent their friends who were still in the minors for free until they made the majors.
Yes, just to get that done, yes.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't read that article, gentlemen, but did that talk about, is that the same number that for the pay-for-play performance, if your quarterback's getting 1.5 million, who's negotiating that deal?
That's the agent getting the 15 to 20 on that.
Yeah.
It's his NIL deal now getting 5%.
I mean, yeah, at that point, NIL should be for free.
That's intriguing.
Little in this world is for free, my friend.
Yeah.
Little in this world is for free.
Well, and on the other side, it was John. I'm blanking. I think it was an NBA guy. Who was the one who negotiated his own contracts and basically got a lawyer and paid him by the hour to look over. That was the other side. Maybe again, student athletes should do that just to make sure everything's there. But again, with more and more teams putting NIL representatives in their front offices, for lack of a better phrase, I don't know if that's being offered. That's something I can find out.
In my history, gentlemen, I've had both situations. I mean, Gary Pinkel was the head coach of football at Missouri when I was chancellor. Okay, his contract was in play when I was there, and he walked into the office himself. Nobody was with him, and we worked out a deal. Okay. That to me was a very gentlemanly way to do the business. The only complication I had was the system head came in to the office too and wanted to plop himself down and take over the conversation, which I had already got almost to a conclusion and almost screwed the deal. But we got it done. It was strictly him. Now he may have had an agent behind him somewhere to talk about this. He definitely had a lawyer that worked with me and my lawyers on the contract terms itself specifically, but he was on his own. With Coach Sumlin, when I was hiring him at Texas A&M, I had a term sheet. I gave it to him. He looked at it. He was happy with it, shook my hand, and it took me weeks to get through working with his agent to get the job done. So it's all over the place. But having a coach on his own do it, I thought was refreshing in many ways. But I suspect that's almost unheard of now at the levels we're talking about today.
And that term sheet is the first thing that gets asked for, correct, Dr. Loftin?
Yeah, that's normally it's going to be something you have to walk into. I mean, I always walked into a meeting with a coach, whether it was a tennis coach or whether it was a football coach, with a term sheet that I had talked to the AD about, talked to the CFO about, made sure we had all aspects of it covered reasonably well before I walked in there. And it was pretty clean. It was less than a page long, usually more than a dozen points on it, and easy to read in just a minute. And so that was handed to the coach. The coach looked it over, asked a few questions, perhaps argue about one or 2 points there, but it was a pretty good deal. But after we left the room, after the handshake occurred, in some cases I had an agent dealing with the AD, dealing with me, dealing with my lawyers to get the job finally done. And that was unpleasant when you think you have a deal and you don't. That's not a good situation.
Let me rewind just a little bit. That's also how you can separate the contenders from the pretenders. If you ask an agent to send a term sheet and they don't, that coach was never coming. That agent is basically using your open job for his client, so to speak, to get it from his original school or maybe get an idea.
It's very common to have agents using leverage to get what they really want. The coach wants to go to a place, okay? Not you. But they come to you offering a deal to try to get you to really, in a sense, bless some kind of at least a conceptual idea of what it's going to be. And they run away with that to the real target the coach has in mind and use that as leverage to get what they want there. That's happened to me several times over my career. And again, it's not, I mean, you sort of know what's happening, but you can't ignore the possibility. If it's somebody you really think is a great coach, you can't ignore the possibility you could persuade them to join you, even though you kind of know, and behind all this is another deal being manufactured by an agent, and you're being used basically just to get what they want. And that's not a good place to be. Never enjoyed being there, but it's unfortunately the nature of the beast these days. You can imagine how it worked with USC and Franklin, and how it worked with a certain other coach from the middle of the country. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. John, it seems like the agents have with all these openings in college football, it seems like they're going to be doing an awful lot of, now I know there's different levels to these openings, like I get it, but it seems like there may be an awful lot of play. It seems like the agents will have an awful lot of control through the rest of this season and into if there are any more firings that happen at the end of the season.
Well, I think you could say today where we stand is that the agents probably have more leverage in that than the schools do through these processes. So it probably will balance out at some point. But I do think, again, a good agent. And the problem, it's not a problem. I mean, I give Sexton for a lot of credit for cornering the market. You know, he and Tracy are only two guys out there doing it, and they do it as good as anybody. And they take advantage of presidents and other school administrators who don't do this for a living, you know, get their fan base all riled up. I mean, again, you don't know how you don't fire James Franklin after that game. If you watched any of the highlights where, I mean, the boos were so loud coming down the field to fire him. It was like, you know, it's again, and you live in the court of public, public perception at that point. And if you're not doing anything, if first the coach doesn't go, then who's next? The AD and then the president. And so, you know, you've got to do something at that point to help turn the tide. But again, I don't think he's going to be out of coaching long with his resume. You know, he may not have the greatest record against AP top 10 teams, but I bet if you put everybody's record up against that, very few do. And the ones who do are probably named Saban and Brian, etc. So, you know, it's a shame that that's the standard that they hold you to, because not everybody's going to be Nick Saban, and they're going to be far and fewer Sabans in this world under the new rules that we're working under. So it's going to be an interesting thing, I think, again, how the coaching carousel continues to revolve around these things. But just like the NFL, I think you're going to see now a lot of these coaches are going to be right back at it the next year somewhere because, at least they've got some skins on the wall, particularly Franklin.
Yeah. Yeah. And it may not it may not be immediate. It could be. Yeah. It may not. But he's got, John, we always look at it, charisma, television presence. Yeah. Fox, CBS, ESPN. He could end up there waiting for the next right job for him.
He will have his choices of television jobs immediately. You know, don't be surprised to see him pop up on the Big Ten network or during the playoffs, you know, for games to get his feedback on there, because no one's going to know the program's better than him because he was game planning for the majority of them this year. So, and then again, the TV guys will call that a trial run. Let's see how he fits, bring him in. But again, we'll see. We'll see if he likes that. Again, I use the example of Dan Mullen. All right, you know, here's a guy that had some success at Mississippi State, went to Florida, not so much. And then he's got a great gig doing ESPN, and he leaves to go coach UNLV because these guys love to coach. They love to coach more than, getting paid a handsome TV contract. And he's doing pretty well at UNLV right now. I believe they were 6-0 last I looked.
Yeah.
So, so again, I think these guys, once you get coaching in your blood, it's hard to get it out. You know, but there's certainly a number that you can pay me that if I was that good, that I would be out. But even Jimbo wants to come back now.
Right.
You know, you hear him say. So, these guys, I think they'll get a chance and they'll resurface somewhere, and that's the nature of the beast.
It's always gotten me, John, that it's like a team that has an opening or is thinking about it, is thinking to themselves, well, we can't get James Franklin. Well, now they can.
You can. Yeah.
He's now out there and available.
UNC got Belichick. Why they something about that?
Exactly. And I also think about what Scott Woodward did at LSU. Like he was going to pull a sitting head coach. It was either going to be Lincoln Riley, who turned it down, but he takes Brian Kelly from Notre Dame. No one had Brian Kelly
totally
on
off
that
the
list.
map.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think that now changes. I don't think it's an unemployed coach any longer. We look at, you've got to look. And that's why I think with Penn State, Dr. Loftin, to your point, Kurt Cignetti at Indiana is having success, but everyone tying together, his success. And is there any state college roots? Matt Rule, I don't know if he goes, but Greg Schiano at Rutgers had been, that's where all these connections come. It's no longer just that coach that's sitting out there and wants to get back in. It could be one from another program.
Well, Cignetti is interesting because not only he's had success, no question about that. 2 years now, he's done some magical things at Indiana. But think about this. His current pay is pretty comparable to what Franklin was getting, okay? So do you want to leave Indiana where it maybe cold occasionally, but it's pretty comfortable for him right now, and move to Penn State where you've seen what's happening there? Do you really want to do that? So I don't know if coaches are going to begin to say, is it just the name brand I care about? Clearly, Penn State's name brand is far superior to Indiana's looking historically at things, and we understand that. But how much value is there in comfort and stability and things like that? The problem we see today is stability and coaching. Those words don't go together anymore.
I had this conversation with Jimbo Fisher during one of the coaches shows during the breaks, and Mark Stoops' name was coming up for LSU. And Mark was Jimbo's DC at Florida State. And what Jimbo said is Mark has a good situation that Mitch Barnhart has allowed that program to grow and had some patience. Now that might be changing now, but is the grass really greener? And that I think is a question that has to be. Now there's some programs when they come calling, you have to go, right? But not all of them, right, John? I'm not sure it's all of them. Is it really better? And do you fall into different circumstances where there isn't that patience any longer?
Right. I don't know Kurt Cignetti at all. I couldn't pick him out of a lineup, but just what I've seen, what I've heard him talk, and when I've seen him interviewed, I get a sense that he's authentic for what he did at James Madison all those years. He wasn't hopping from job to job to job. Took that same process, basically a lot of the same players, and competed at a very high level in the Big Ten. And now you look at them right now, and they're the odds on, obviously have to play Ohio State, but he couldn't have any more power right now. But I think, again, you're at Cincinnati where they're going to love you forever. All right. You can go 8-3 for the next 20 years and they're going to name buildings after you. You go 8-3 at Penn State, they're going to say, we got the wrong guy. And your losses could be to Ohio State, Michigan, and Oregon, who are going to beat a lot of teams.
That's the point, guys.
Bo Pelini and Frank Solich at Nebraska, right?
I think he's the guy that's old enough that he's comfortable in his own skin, and for him to stay at Indiana probably makes a lot of sense. Will he get a raise? Absolutely. So it's not like he's going to be doing this for the money, and I think he's got a great thing going there. He's got Mark Cuban giving him NIL money. Why would you want to leave there?
That's exactly right. We might have broadcast.com come back.
Yeah, exactly. So
think about it. Dan Lanning at Oregon was already asked about the Penn State job.
Yeah, everybody is.
Yeah.
Did they ask Elko at his press conference? Probably someone did.
No, but they wanted to.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay.
But they wanted to. Dr. Loftin, the Score Act. I guess it's like a wrestler.
Well, we
keeps
talked
rising.
Today,
I'm not sure it's going to
back.
win the match, but it keeps rising from the mat.
We talked 2 episodes back about the Score Act, and again, it looked like that our friend Cody from Lubbock was going to be getting it really suppressed. He paid for ads, but now you see competing ads. If you were on TV all this weekend, you saw several ads coming from the other side of the equation, really pushing the Score Act out there big time. What happened this past few days is the D1 commissioners, there's like 30 odd of these guys who are D1 commissioners, wrote a joint letter to the leadership in the House that's in charge of this act right now, urging its adoption. And that's interesting because about 10 of those those sign-on commissioners had been very vocally opposed to it at one point. But I think they're realizing that the alternative might be worse than what the SCORE Act is, because there's people pushing, Cody among them, and one of his captives in legislatures are pushing right now the idea that we should have an alternative thing called the SAFE Act that is a lot friendlier perceptually to the players and much less friendly to the NCAA and to the conferences. So there's this sort of tit for tat right now between the Power Four and what they want to see happening, the NCAA, who wants to see some MLB-like protections in terms of antitrust options in there, and then there's this idea of, can we get something done? The reality is that every coach hates the fact that you've got different states with different rules, and you're competing for a player at a national level, and the playing field is far from being level right now on the NIL side of the equation. That's reality for a coach right now. And nobody wants to have to deal with that. So the coaches are pressuring, I think, the ADs who are pressuring the commissioners, let's get this thing done. It may be imperfect. It may not be quite what we need, but better have something in play and done than have nothing at all, or this SAFE Act, which they see is very anti the conferences, and especially the big conferences and many of the schools. So that's where we are right now with that. I can't predict what's going to happen here. Unfortunately, the SCORE Act passing the House is not the only problem. There's not much sentiment for it in the Senate that I can see right now. And so I don't know how hard it's going to be to push that thing uphill and get it through the House. That may be doable, but then getting through the Senate right now may be very impossible. And of course, nobody's talking right now because of a certain problem with the with the Congress at the moment and paying the bills.
Greg Sankey was at Kyle Field, and he spoke with reporters the Saturday before the Florida game, and he said it's been good dialogue with Congress, probably better dialogue that they've had. That they've actually had conversations, he was saying, back to 2020, the 2019-2020 season. Yeah. The other thing that he came out, he was very pointed and against the SAFE Act, and his big thing was, he said, against combining the TV rights of all the conferences to sell together. Cody Campbell wants to do that, wants to make the changes to that TV rights model that we talked about that dates back to 1961. But look, Cody Campbell's been very much vocal about conference commissioners, and yet Greg with ESPN, Tony Petitti with what the Big Ten has done, that's been very friendly with them. And Greg Sankey was very pointed and said, we don't think that's going to be better. But interesting that he was able to take that stand, if you will, or let it be known before the game on against Florida last Saturday at Kyle Field. Well,
I'm just saying, and of course, we're seeing ads paid for by the Greg Sankey side of the equation to combat the ads paid for by Cody Campbell, to try to bring some degree of balance into this conversation right now. I don't know if the public really, in general, understands this enough to care about it. I think that's what it's going to come down to, is how many people care about it. Right now, people who write big checks care about it potentially. And there is a audience for that word in Congress because they need the money to run for office and so on. But I'm not sure the person on the street really understands much about the SCORE versus SAFE Act, or even cares about those two being debated right now. So therein lies our problem. This is not a nationally consequential thing outside of the circle of not just fans of athletics, but those who really are deeply enmeshed in it and deeply write checks for it.
I thought it was interesting. I was looking into this, and Joe Donnelly was a Democrat who served in Congress and as a senator for Indiana. And he's all for the SCORE Act and wrote an op-ed for The Hill doing that. And conversely, athletes.org, which is a players association for college athletes, very much against. So they want the SAFE Act, to your point, and that's the dichotomy.
Well,
between
one of the issues really is the fact that the SCORE Act specifically is talking about prohibiting the idea of students, athletes as employees, whereas the SAFE Act is really focusing in the other direction there. And so if you're a player I think these players are not particularly thinking hard about this, but if you're a player, it sounds good to be able to be an employee. Well, I'm not sure that's really true, but that's what they're thinking right now. So there's a sentiment among athletes themselves that they need to go the direction of becoming employees of the school. They don't understand what employment really means in terms of contracts, like you understand. And you, for example, you're employed. I'm retired, but you have a contract. You know what your job is. You know how to do it, and you feel like this is a very nice situation to understand what's going on. These athletes have never been employees of the nature we're talking about here. They don't grasp what that probably means ultimately if they become employees of a university. So therein lies the problem, I believe. But the employee spokespeople are making this a big deal too. The unions like it, for example. The students seem to like it as well because, again, they don't understand it fully, I believe. And so that's our big dichotomy between the two directions here. Are you an employee? Are you not? Is there going to be protections for the NCAA and for the conferences in terms of antitrust? That's been the basis for almost all the major decisions against NCAA has been antitrust. So it's a big deal to the commissioners. It's a big deal to the NCAA to have some degree of certainty about how you can and cannot act under the antitrust laws we have today.
John, if only there was a financial advisor to help us with all of this.
You know what? You got to look at this. We're trying to deal with every issue kind of in its own nutshell, but you have to have a holistic approach on all this to get it. I mean, there's issues to being an employee. There are issues to being a conference commissioner. And again, the one thing Cody's right is that I don't think they give him enough credit for was that if you had all those rights unfettered right now and you put them all out on the table, you would get more money under that scenario than you would today. All right. But to get to that scenario, it's pretty tough. That's why you need people to kind of help you get there. And I think we've got some friends of the program at Holistic Planning that can do just that. They take a look at all of your needs, not just financial, but estate taxes too, all these different types of things, and try to get you in a place where you can live that vision for your life. And if we could just be that simple at the NCAA, I think the majority of our problems would all be gone. We could get Jason Barber and his team to help us do this. I think we could be in great shape. I mean, I'm working right now trying to get my taxes in for the extension, and I could use his help right now because putting it off for this long. But
it's the 14th of October, sir.
Approach is so important.
See, I just had the freelancer flashback, John. It isn't just April 15th. It's October 15th also, with
That's
such
right.
a huge date.
4 times a year, sir, you pay your estimated taxes.
The quarterly. Yeah, the quarterly. Yeah.
I need help.
Yeah. I am so that they've been friends of this program. So glad Jason and his crew's coming aboard. That's very cool. I think it's very cool. It's organic to me.
Yeah,
that's what I find it very
more,
cool.
more to come. More to come about.
Can't think of a better group to work with on a show called Follow the Money than Jason and his team.
Yeah. John, I wanted to ask you real quick on a follow-up to what Cody Campbell wants about these rights. Is it similar to what Rob Manfred is going to try to do with Major League Baseball? Because it's hard to tell locals not to cut their own deals. That if he wants this standardized deal, I mean, it's kind of why it broke up in the back, because ABC had the 1 game or 2 game. Like, I'm still trying to put my head around that one. How am I thinking too small about the Spurs will go with Fox, but the Sixers don't have a Fox, right? If you try to nationalize that,
it's apples and oranges. You got to look at everybody's got a unique set. I think what Manfred's trying to do is get all of his rights up at once, so he's in the best position to capitalize on all those and be able to have that discussion with all the players out there, particularly the streaming companies like Apple and Amazon who want to be in the local game. Now, if I'm the Spurs, that might sound great, but they're going to get some money for that. But then what these teams have realized now too, if you're running the San Antonio market or Philadelphia market or pick your market, don't you want to know who your customers are? Only customers they know right now are the ones that have bought a ticket and come through the gate. But that's probably 10% of their total audience. That other 90% has watched the Spurs on all these different platforms, including Fox Sports over the years. And so that data was held up by your cable company. Now you can get that number directly from a streamer, and that's going to be another monetization data point for them to be able to then know who those customers are, get them in their funnel, in their ecosystem, and potentially create more revenue opportunity or deeper level of engagement with that. because I do think, again, Spurs fans aren't necessarily 76ers fans at the end of the day. And I think even all the local teams, I think, don't want to necessarily give up those rights. If you're the Milwaukee Bucks at the end of the day, you might get a little bit more money in that environment than what the Knicks would get. But I think every team wants to control its own rights. And even if you're the NBA this year, all right, who did this new deal, I think is a great template to talk about, is there's still 60, 65 games out there for the local market to exploit. And I think, again, and if you can exploit that in a market and grow that fan base better, I think, again, you're always better off controlling your own destiny than leaving it up to to group. Because I think, unfortunately, whatever level you're at to, when you're trying to group 30 some odd entities together, you're going to always go back to what's the least common denominator to get this across the finish line. And to do that, that might not be in the Spurs' best interest versus it being in the Phoenix Suns' best interest. So I think, again, that's the church and state argument that they're having, is that, what Manfred says, these local teams still want to keep all those local rights because they're going to have probably 130 games left out there, which is still a significant package. That's the number one watch show in most of their markets all summer long. Right. So again, and they don't want us to give that to a third party that they're not going to know the data for exchange for maybe a little bit of money, but nothing that's going to be a game changer for them. Not like 140 million that the Big Ten's going to get.
Well, how do the Dodgers and the Yankees say, yeah, we're going to do this? Because the Dodgers have buku bucks from Spectrum and the Yankees and the Yes Network.
Yeah, so they're never going to say yes to this. So that's part of the problem too. And so, where are the teams? There's probably a dozen teams out there, the Mets, the Cubs, the Yankees, the Red Sox, that are more brand names than the Padres, the Royals, from that standpoint. So I don't think he's going to have much success getting that across the finish line. But if he can still give enough games to a streamer to make them feel comfortable about the process. I mean, the NBA this year, Andrew, I don't know if you've looked at it. There's going to be a national game every day.
Every day
of the week.
Yeah. Is it my understanding that the locals no longer get a playoff game?
No, that's right. They lost.
Amazon takes all of those? That is a huge, John, it was a huge change getting the first round, right?
Yeah.
Because everything was, you might get game 1, 4, and 7 and 2 and 6 in the net. To not get a playoff game? I'm interested to see that reception come April.
Yeah, and I think, again, as a TV guy over the years, those games outside of your local market, most of those games were televised. Very seldom did you ever have an exclusive that you could truly leverage, for that one or two games. And even if you did, you didn't know it till, a few days out. So could you really monetize it from an ad sales perspective? Probably not. So I don't know if that's that big a deal. I still think, again, there's enough local content out there, with streaming that, again, you still need to know who those fans are. Because, again, looking at that Spurs example, if 90% of your audience has never been to the AT&T Center, or Frost Bank Center now, you need to know who they are. And how you know who they are is how they follow you on television. If you know that data from streaming, it really puts you in an excellent position to monetize them even better. It's even better.
Yeah, because it's way more than just the eyeballs viewing the game. Like you say, there's other ways to engage those fans now that you know who they are.
I want to buy a ticket to an upcoming game. I want to buy merchandise. I want to play a gamification process. And heaven forbid sports betting ever gets legalized. Think that could be an opportunity.
Ooh, never thought about that. Or to your point, what was one of your examples? Hey, tie game, last 2 minutes. Do you want to watch it?
Yeah.
Right? You get a notification.
Yeah, come and tick in, and all of a sudden, again, with the click of your phone, and you get that deal, and you can watch. It's so much easier to do that than logging in, getting your TV, turning it on, all that. So I think, again, there will be a system that will, I think, apply to that this younger generation, that's the way they've grown up.
Yeah,
they don't need to watch it on the living room. They're going to probably consume their consumption on this little thing.
So you see, Andrew, you're sitting in a booth working at every game. You're not out there like I am among the unwashed, okay? When I sit in the stands, I look to my sides, what do I see? Everybody I see has got a phone up watching a different game than they're putting in front of right now.
Yeah.
Or they may, a few of them, actually be listening to a talking head about that particular game, getting more, because you can't hear much of Kyle Field in terms of being a fan there over the PA system. But I think people are using their phones more and more and more to watch a game, not the game they're actually sitting in front of as a fan. I find that fascinating. And John's right. The data is there for the streamers, and you can be very pinpoint accurate about how you design a specific experience if you know who you're talking to and you have a history of that person.
Yeah, And that person will be more likely to engage with you and be someone you can monetize better in your ecosystem.
It means more money. It means more of this for everybody.
It's all about, again, follow the money.
Nailed it. Hold on. It's not a mic, but it's a drop.
Thank you.
Fun one, as always. Can't wait till we get back together again. Thank you both. collegesportsftm@gmail.com if you have a question for us in an upcoming episode. For Dr. Loftin, for Jon Heidtke, for Nick Savage, our producer, I'm Andrew Monaco. Jason Barber in Holistic Planning, welcome aboard. We thank you so much for joining us. So long, everybody.